We're going to start with a very short 1-minute video featuring Amanda Gorman talking about poetry, but I believe it relates to the words of Jesus in the gospel.
U.S. history class, and your teacher may play a video of Martin Luther King Jr. saying, "We will be able to hew out of this mountain of despair a stone of hope." That's poetry. Or maybe even here in New York City, you're going to go visit the Statue of Liberty, where there's a sonnet that declares, as Americans, "Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free." So you see, when someone asks me to write a poem that's not political, what they're really asking me is to not ask charged and challenging questions in my poetic work. And that does not work because poetry is always at the pulse of the most dangerous and the most daring questions that a nation or a world might face. Maybe later you're gonna be at a protest and someone's gonna have a poster that says, "They buried us, but they didn't know we were seeds." That's poetry. You might be in your U.S. history class, and your teacher may play a video of Martin Luther King Jr. saying, "We will be able to hew out of this mountain of despair a stone of hope." That's poetry. Or maybe even here in New York City, you're going to go visit the Statue of Liberty, where there's a sonnet that declares, as Americans, "Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free." So you see, when someone asks me to write a poem that's not political, what they're really asking me is to not ask charged and challenging questions in my poetic work. And that does not work because poetry is always at the pulse of the most dangerous and the most daring questions that a nation or a world might face. Maybe.
So in preparing for this sermon in particular and for this month, I've been doing a couple of different things. I've been watching the mini-series from a few years ago called John Adams that you might have seen at the time that it came out. You can watch it now on HBO Max and in portions on YouTube. And also, I've been reading the book that we've been reading in our weekly Zoom book group called A Founding Mother, a novel of Abigail Adams. And it's caused me to really revisit things that mostly I hadn't thought about since high school civics class. I was surprised to see, and then that led me down other rabbit trails too, to learn more about this period that we're celebrating the 250th anniversary of this week. And I remind us that in the Congregational Church, that's our legacy, the Congregationalists. We have it right there it's our first name, Congregational Church of the Peninsula. What we're celebrating at 250, the Congregational Church was right up in it from the very beginning. The Puritans, that was one of our other names that we're not so proud to claim today, though it's a perfectly good word if you look at it carefully. The Congregationalists were the ones who established the Massachusetts Bay Colony. It was the established state church in Massachusetts until the 1830s. You had to belong to it, whether you liked it or not. And it was two groups of people in particular, the Congregationalists and the Episcopalians, who were instrumental leaders in the events of the American Revolution of the 1770s. For them, it was very much a matter of what happens when they apply their faith to the concept of freedom. Now, it was an imperfect association. Many of the colonies were established as bastions or havens to be places where you had not only freedom of religion, but freedom from religion, depending upon which colony it was. The Congregationalists had most of New England. The Episcopalians had several southern states. Rhode Island was established by Baptists. Philadelphia established, or Pennsylvania, by Quakers. So these groups didn't necessarily want freedom of religion for other people to practice their religion. Or the Catholics had Maryland, but they did want to have at least one place where they could practice their religion free from the reign of the king and the Church of England. So how we think about freedom of conscience has evolved since then, and freedom of and freedom from religion. There also were other religious groups that rarely get acknowledged. There were communities of Jews living in New Amsterdam, New York, and the first synagogue was in Truro, in Rhode Island. And also, there were indigenous people who celebrated their own spirituality, and they were forced to convert to Christianity in New England and also here in California by a different set of conquerors who they were forced to convert to Catholicism. Also, formerly enslaved or enslaved people who were brought to the United States had their own religious practices that were important to them, and many of them were Muslim by faith and practice. Others practiced in indigenous various kinds of African religions. And those under forced conversion often ended up being Baptist because there's such freedom of organization in the Baptist church, or it led to the formation of separate African-American denominations. We might ask ourselves, what does this have to do with the present? But we still have separate churches. Our churches are generally racially segregated in the United States. And there are still reminders of this history. The African-American Episcopal Church, there's one in San Mateo, and they're the church that's stepping up, especially right now, with support from us to provide housing for children and young adults leaving foster care by providing housing at St. James AME Zion Church. So these historic things still resonate into the present, but the Congregationalist Church had a particular role to play. Our form of church governance that we established, however imperfectly, to have people participating in their own destiny as churches, Congregationalist churches, became the pattern for American government. And many of the early leaders, and throughout the last 250 years, Congregationalists have contributed one of the largest groups of people to represent us in government. So we're all up in it. And I was reminded of that too in reading the history of Abigail Adams and her husband, John. John was the second president of the United States. Abigail was the first lady to live in what became the president's house. Later we called the White House. And she was an ardent Congregationalist, as was her husband. Her father was a Congregationalist pastor. And her religious values caused her, from a place of faith, to call into question what was happening around the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence was particularly the document around which people living in the colonies coalesced to declare their independence from the King of England and the Church of England also, but particularly the King of England. I reread it this week several times and listened to it, and I was struck by how it's a humanist document. The words God or Christ never appear in it, but there are many religious themes in it as well. And there are copies of the Declaration available by the back if you want one, and also copies of this Abigail Adams book. Abigail Adams, privately educated because women were not allowed to go to school. It was, by the way, the Congregationalists who established some of the first schools that women could attend, female seminaries that became more famous as what we now call Seven Sisters School, Howard University for African Americans, Oberlin in Ohio, also a school that was one of the first to admit women as well as formerly enslaved people. But she was self-taught. She was annoyed that her sons could receive tutoring and schooling, but that her daughters could not. Very smart. And she engaged in this lively correspondence with her husband about the rights of women and also about the rights of the people who were then enslaved. As part of her faith, she said, there's something wrong looking at equality for property-owning men only who are white, but not considering that there's some inherent contradiction there if we're not also going to be looking at collectively what it means to be free for women who were considered property and for enslaved people who were considered property, both male and female. And so in our book group on Tuesday, one of our oldest members, Erlene, was very excited. We weren't even online yet, and she wanted to read the first paragraph of the Founding Mothers book, which is this. So this is what the author imagines Abigail Adams thinking. But what of the mothers of this country? Fathers might drive the plows that till the fields of our future, but mothers provide the water, pull the weeds, and nurture the buds. Because men oversee the harvest, they take the credit for the crop, but without mothers, not one sprout would grow, whether the fruit be a child or a nation. It is mothers who nourish and guide each other shoot toward the light without knowing what may blossom and what may wither on the vine, without knowing which children will live or die. And as one of the mothers, I cannot help but think back upon the acts of my life that may have brought us to this place. And when the declaration takes place, and I have to say, watching the John Adams recreation of the television miniseries and Laura Linney as Abigail Adams, it's quite a thriller, really. Which colony will support separation from England, which one will not. They very much wanted to do it as a consensus, and they could not achieve a consensus entirely. Each group struggling with whether, as faithful people, they could rebel against authority and propose a radical change. And yet it was time and again their faith, which they cited as what gave them the courage to stand up and say, we are going to do this a different way, however imperfectly. This is partly what caused Abigail Adams to write to her husband in this piece of correspondence. I read a number of her letters for this, in which she questions both slavery and the place of women in the law. And she pleaded with him to consider that whether or not they could change the laws in both regards around slavery and also around women being seen as property, as part of this great declaration of independence. When he comes back to her after the declaration has been issued, he asks her, well, what did you think after? And she's thinking about, well, I wrote to you about this. I said, remember the ladies. No corrections or complaints, he says. Well, I did think slavery would be denounced, she says. It was, John replied, but we removed the denunciation to appease the southern states, or they wouldn't sign. And which states prevented you from remembering the ladies? The Declaration says all men are created equal, whilst you are proclaiming peace and goodwill to men and wishing to emancipate all nations. Why must you insist upon retaining an absolute power over the wives? John licked butter from his fingertips. This is a novel. Does not the term men include all mankind? So when did you mean to include the ladies? And he says, you'll have to ask Jefferson for whatever he meant when he wrote it. I'm keener to know what you think, she said, because remember, husband, arbitrary power is like most other things which are very hard, very liable to be broken. So I raise this to say, we are celebrating a great accomplishment, a breakthrough in how humanity is thought of, not just property and having certain rights. And at the same time, some of the leaders, they were aware there were women who were speaking up, there were abolitionists who were speaking up, there were enslaved people who were speaking up, but their stories, their voices were not taken into account. And this omission has haunted us for 250 years. This is some of the things we'll look at in the course of this month. And at the same time, there's something really astonishingly inspiring about a group of people saying, we will not let you oppress us anymore. So I think that these connect directly to the gospel this morning, in which Jesus has some observations about the time in which they find themselves and invites people to pay attention to who are we listening to, who are we hearing, and then at the end of which he issues an invitation that I believe is at the heart of the best principles of the Declaration of Independence and also at the heart of our Christian faith. It begins with Jesus saying to them, look, people are telling you that the way things are not working, and nobody of note is listening. He uses this example of children playing in the street. He said it's like when kids are playing and they're playing happy music and saying, come dance with us, come play with us, and they're ignored. Or, and then he uses another example, it's like children crying and nobody pays attention and is not listening to the voices of children who are crying. And then Jesus points out to them in this way, who are we listening to? What voices are we paying attention to? And he says, John the Baptist was a prophet who spoke, and yet when he came, you said he was too weird. He ate weird foods. You were able to shut your ears to what John the Baptist was pointing out. You said he was crazy. That's literally the word there. Demon-possessed, it's a first century expression that says, not in their right minds. And they attributed this to his lifestyle. They were able to dismiss him or discredit the clear things he was drawing to their attention, the ability to change, to repent. And then Jesus comes, another prophet, and they discredit him for what he is saying because he drinks, he eats with sinners and tax collectors. They literally make a reference to his weight. Jesus is a glutton, and Jesus is a wine bibber, as the King James says. They discredit him and refuse to listen to him because of how he lives. And the truth is, both John the Baptist and Jesus, as well as the people, I believe 250 years ago at their best, were paying attention to voices that others were not paying attention to. Prophets don't exist in a vacuum. Prophets speak truth to us or truths to us. They don't necessarily foretell the future, but sometimes they see the best of what we're capable of and the worst of what could happen if we don't pay attention to what we're doing. And then in this passage, Jesus issues his own, I think, invitation to interdependence, if you will. He says to them, where is it? Oh, here it is. Come to me. It was covered up by a Post-it note, the worst invention. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Some pieces of Scripture are so clear and so lucid and so beautiful that they stand out, I think, as poetry. I think of Paul's writing in 1 Corinthians 13, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. And this passage, too, I think, is like that. It's a poem in the best sense of what Amanda Gorman was inviting us to consider as poetry. Poetry is at the pulse of the most dangerous and the most daring questions that a nation or a world might ask. When Jesus says, come unto me, all who are weary, come unto me and find rest. These are an invitation for us, both to take them in for how they might apply to our own situation. Imagine Jesus engaging you in conversation, say, come unto me if you're tired, if you're weary, and I will help you, because what I offer is not heavy or burdensome. It's light and freedom. And also, it's a challenge to us to embody those principles. Amanda Gorman reminds us of that sonnet that's at the base of the Statue of Liberty. That's an invitation to those who are lost to come and be found. And I think Jesus is embodying the same words here. Come unto me. If you're weary, if you're tired, if you're excluded, if no one is listening to you, if you're overburdened, if the expectations of religion or society or other people are too much for you, come to me and you will find rest for your soul. You'll find Sabbath rest. Sabbath rest wasn't just taking a nap. It was a world that was restored to God's original vision of it, where people live in love, in community. On this 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, a work in progress, certainly, and we are part of the work, and we are part of the progress, I hope. I invite us to think about what it means to hear those words and also to live them out. I am moved continually by the work that I see taking place in subgroups in the church who are trying to struggle with what it means to embody the words of Jesus. This week, the Circle of Compassion, Circle of Care, providing concrete, tangible, financial and material assistance to people who are navigating our broken immigration system, I think are really grappling in a sense with this poem of Jesus that invites us to make a material difference in the lives of people. When we hear Justice Kagan a week ago call out the racism that is behind the ending of temporary protective status for Haitians, I believe that she's aligning us with the words of Jesus that say, "Come unto me," not "stay away from me," not "don't bother me," "come unto me." So that's my hope for us today. Yes, 250, not perfect, lots of room for change, lots of room for evolution and revolution, and at the same time, a promise and an aspiration that we can still embody and live up to and live into. Amen.